Hi Stonewall, I'm Onyx Evie, and today I'm going to be talking about prequels, midquels, and sequels. Their purpose in a story, why are they necessarily needed or not necessarily needed at all, what's the idea behind them, and what exactly are they? A prequel is a story written after a series has already been ongoing and takes place before anything has happened. Most likely following the parents of the main protagonist, or generations past of this world, or anything in between. Really, it's just an added context section of the story. Meanwhile, a midquel is something that is happening during the main plot. Most likely, it's just expanding on the world rather than the main story itself. Meanwhile, a sequel is an expansion on the main story and giving us a little bit more of the characters or world specifically of what we love. A prequel's purpose is to give us context. If a prequel does not give us context, then it's not really a prequel. For example, the Fantastic Beasts movies. They're prequels to the Harry Potter series as a whole, but their idea was to give us more context on Newt Scamander, the writer of Fantastic Beasts, and where to find them. This is a canon book in the series that is required for any Care of Magical Creatures class. It's what's required. But it was also originally supposed to give us more context on Dumbledore and Grindelwald. It does give us some of this, but as we are probably not going to get more movies, we're never going to see that epic fight. If you have a story that brings up an epic fight between a well-known character that's supposed to be very powerful and another character that we haven't seen many feats from that's equally as powerful, give us the ding-dang fight! It's kind of like dangling a little bit of a treat in front of someone and them getting excited about it, but you just keep dangling it there, and now we just want to see it already. The biggest problem with the Fantastic Beasts movies is not that its characters were dull. The characters were amazing for the most part. It's not that the poor pacing between each movies. It's how they were handled direction-wise. There were so many plots happening at once with it, with so little things interconnecting. I had to watch the second and third one 4 times each just to understand what the heck is going on. There was too much going on and not enough intersection between them, along with the audio for the conversations was so much lower than the fight choreography audio that it was almost jarring at times. I'll rant about the Fantastic Beasts movies another time. The characters were amazing for the most part, but it just missed the mark so hard on what a Harry Potter prequel could have been. Moving on to another example of a prequel's purpose of giving us context, Songbirds and Snakes was a new prequel on its way, which cannot wait. It gives us some more context of the world of the Hunger Games. The context that we should be getting at when it comes down to a prequel is more information that you probably were asking for in the original that you don't necessarily need. For example, why were the Hunger Games started and who started them? Yes, we have the idea that it was because the districts rebelled, causing the Dark Days and the war. But why were these specifically used, and who created them? We get that answered. How did Snow become a tyrant that he is in the original? We get that answered. Along with several other questions, go read Songbirds and Snakes if you're a Hunger Games fan and have not yet. And, can't wait for the... I'm just glad it's a good day to be a Hunger Games fan because we're still getting more and nothing has missed yet. But if a prequel does not give you added context onto what a story is doing, it kind of misses the mark. Yes, this is more story in the world, but did it necessarily need to be set in the past for us to enjoy it? if it doesn't give us more answers. There's also the problem if it gives us too many answers. We don't need every single noodle incident answered of a character. If you don't know what a noodle incident is, I'll explain that in a future video. I have that planned, it's in the works. You'll see later. But if it doesn't give us context to everything, and it gives us context to nothing, it kind of misses the point. We don't need every single question answered. In fact, I suggest you leave a lot of questions unanswered. If an audience is left speculating about stuff in your story, you've done your job. A prequel shouldn't just leave you with all the answers of your questions. It should leave you with more questions than you had coming in. New questions, better questions. Moving gears over to midquels. Midquels are expansion of the world and what other characters are doing. The idea of a midquel is a story that is happening at the exact same time or in between main plots. It fits in the timeline of just before stuff or just during stuff. For example, most of the time a midquel has a different main character than the normal main story. It could have character B being the main character this time around, and it could just be their perspective on what's going on. This is a perfectly fine and honestly kind of a creative use of the idea of a midquel. It's giving us the exact same story, but from a different character's lens. In my opinion, it's something that means the author is very in tune with how the story runs, and thought about what would happen if this character was following the story through their lens. It's honestly quite fascinating whenever this is done amazing, because it's something we not necessarily need. A midquel is absolutely not necessarily. Same thing with a sequel and a prequel, but they all should try and strive to make the original story sound better. A midquel gives us some context of why a character is not there. For example, in Trials of Apollo Book 1, we figure out that Annabeth is, not there. While Apollo was trying to find someone who would help him regain his immortality, Percy mentions that Annabeth had to leave New York on a family emergency. What is its family emergency? Her cousin just died. This sounds so weird out of context. I mean, it sounds weird in context. Welcome to mythology and mythology-based stories. But we find out Annabeth's cousin has been missing for 2 years and dies in the Sirius Magnus chase, following Annabeth's cousin. If you are questioning, if he's dead, how is he the main character of a story? Glad you answered. Go read it. You'll find out. But it gives us context of why Annabeth was not there at the first Trials of Apollo's book. And then later in the Trials of Apollo series, the last book, we figured out why Chiron was not at the camp when Apollo returned after parts of his quest. He was dealing with a different problem. It gives us a more open world situation. A midquel is basically all the side quests other heroes are doing while the main quest is going on. It kind of just gives us a little bit more of a situation that the characters are doing stuff even when they're not there. Which honestly, good storytelling. Rock on. Meanwhile, a sequel is a complete expansion. If a midquel is all the side quests that you don't need for a story to be fully enjoyable, a sequel is an expansion pass to the original story. It gives us more story. And a good sequel remembers where it left off its characters and world. It also doesn't tell the exact same story that was told in the first one. Whew. So now time for the story aspect of these stories. A prequel story is automatically, once you go into it, a tragedy. Because you know how it's going to end. The best tragedies, like Shakespearean ones, you know from the beginning, this is not going to end well for anyone. For example, Hamlet. Throughout the entire story, Hamlet is actively trying to avoid the story and the characteristics a main character of his type goes through. He knows for a fact he's in a tragedy. The tragic part of a tragedy is that a character does not know that they are in a tragedy most of the time. Romeo did not know that he was in a tragedy. He thought he was in a love story. Macbeth did not think that he was in a tragedy. He thought he was in a triumph story. Hamlet is the exception to this, as he knows that if he follows the plot, he's doomed. And from his lack of decision making, he dooms himself. A prequel is the exact same way, but from the audience's perspective. For example, in the main story, most of the time, stuff isn't great by the time that we go into it. Because the main characters need something to fix. Whether it's active or proactive or in the background and the characters have to discover it, stuff isn't normally all sunshines and rainbows. Meanwhile, a prequel is in reverse. But when the prequel starts, we know exactly it has to end in a point that is either the exact same as the original story's beginning, or at the point where it'll build up to that problem. If it doesn't necessarily have to be a prequel in the first place. So most likely, if a prequel is following this track, it starts in an amazing place. And us as the audience will automatically know which characters are most likely going to die, which ones are going to make it, which ones are going to be irrelevant, and which ones are going to fall down a path that no one could prevent. We see the writing on the walls, and the characters don't know they are doomed. Unless they are actively breaking the fourth wall, and in which it's more of a comedy tragedy than a tragedy. But still, when a character is in a prequel, they are in a tragedy, by all intents and purposes, because there is nothing to avoid in the main story. Back to midquels. A midquel can have any story going on. It's more interesting if the story is different than the main one. For example, if the main one is a high-risk adventure story, where the main characters are consistently having to take down 20 different people at once, then it could be interesting to switch gears in the midquel to a type of slow espionage type story, following a different character and explaining why they're not in the specific story at that time. It would be kind of interesting to see a midquel where it kind of just does its own thing. That's the point. It follows a character doing something different and probably is explaining why they're there. Heck, a lot of stuff that's plot relevant could be set up in the midquel. For example, character B could be actively going off and finding the Deus Ex Machina that the main characters will need in the finale of the main story. Or solving a different problem that the main characters are dealing with at the time. Or it could also give us context of stuff that a character did during a time skip. I talked about time skips in my last video. Go click the card up there if you want to see that. But it also gives us more context of the world at large. It expands upon stuff that was built up in the main story while still having the main story going on. Another thing, back to the whole, it gives us more context of the time skip stuff. We can follow a character doing their own build-up and training or adventure during the time skip. It would be basically like seeing characters C, train up, or try to find their way back to their friends while the time skip is happening. Kind of just gives us another lens of how the time skip worked, rather than just us going straight from point A to point B during that time. A sequel, on the other hand, biggest thing is, how did the last story end? And does it make sense for us to throw these characters into this world without changed? Yeah, sure, between sequels, very little can change. It could just be kiss, fade to black, on to the next sequel. or it could have had a time skip in between, or it could be a completely new generation. I talked about new generations in the time skip video. Go check it out. Go check it out. But something Legend of Korra did is remembered where it left off the old main characters. Every single character's story was completed back in it. A sequel doesn't necessarily need to continue on said story. It could have an entirely new story in that world with the new generation. Legend of Korra builds upon the world. In the world of Avatar: The Last Airbender, before Legend of Korra happened, before the entire story happened, it was kind of in a feudal farming period. Yes, people had some technology, but the most advanced group was the Fire Nation. And that's because their element at the time was the most industrious of them all. And they're also prepping for a war for several decades before it actually happened. They were ahead of all the other nations, and all the other nations didn't have enough time and energy to keep up. Everyone else was very, very dependent on their bending, while firebenders were using their bending to become independent of it. Pretty cool, huh? Meanwhile, by the time of Legend of Korra, everything is much more industrious. It's a steampunk era futuristic stuff compared to the time of Last Airbender. Why? The invention of one thing: metal bending. Metal bending allowed for more ways to industrialize. And with all the nations at peace now, all the other nations can catch up to the point that the Fire Nation was and surpass it. Now that they aren't focusing strictly on building war weapons, they can build stuff that makes life easier and use their bending to do it. That's why there's so much of a time gap difference in the technology compared to Last Airbender and Legend of Korra. It's excellent. Back to leaving the story off in a place that makes sense, there's also the situation of leaving the characters off in a place that makes sense. In a prequel, we already know what's going to happen to most of these characters. They're either dead, irrelevant, or make it to the next story. There's not much of an in-between. Meanwhile, in a midquel, the characters are probably already going through arcs, and we can't exactly interrupt them. Yes, we can give them new arcs to overcome in this short story, but we don't necessarily need to do that. We can build on their arcs that they've already been going through. Meanwhile, a sequel, do not give a character the exact same arc, I swear. If you give a character the exact same arc every single time, if you give a story the exact same problem every single time there's a continuation, there is no point in reading it on. If every single time a story's solution was get stronger, just lift bro, there's no point in the story. You've already read that same story with the exact same characters again and again. So, for example, say in the original story we have the characters having to go on a quest to find an item to beat the BBEG. And they slowly have to get stronger and go through their independent arcs while trying to find this item. They beat the BBEG with this item, and now everything is chill again. In the sequel, don't give them you have to beat the BBEG and go on this quest to get this specific item. Don't do that! Especially if the items are functionally the same and explained the exact same way. Just don't! If you're going to tell the exact same story again, don't make a new sequel. Just don't. But what you could do for the sequel, instead of doing the exact same thing again, where the characters have to get stronger to get this new item, have it so that they have to beat the BBEG to this item. This item will not beat the BBEG. They know this. The big bad guy will not be beaten just with this item, but they have to save the world, so they have to prevent this bad guy from getting said item. Or they have to have them go on a quest to give a message to someone about the bad guy so that they can prepare. Or have them having to find a master who will train them to beat the bad guy. Something that the Avatar The Last Airbender does with each season is give the characters 2 quests to complete by the end of it. For example, in the original season of Avatar The Last Airbender, the main goal was to get to the North Pole so that Aang and Katara could learn waterbending. There was also these small plots that are happening on the side. For example, Aang only having 1 year to learn the rest of the elements. Every single episode wasn't necessarily them actively trying to get to the North Pole, but it was always there. But by the time that they got to that goal, they had other problems to contend with, such as the entire siege at the North Pole incident that happened while there. Every single season of Avatar The Last Airbender is formulated like this, but it's still different. We have different things in every single season. In Book Earth, we have the situation of they are no longer just going to a specific location. They have to now find an earthbending teacher. And that takes a few episodes, so they found Toph, and now they have to learn now Aang has to learn earthbending. And then they end up in a desert while they're trying to find a way to stop the Fire Nation. How to beat them before Sozin Comet happens. And now they have to get to Ba Sing Se. And then there's an entire arc in Ba Sing Se that they have to go through. The Book Earth gives us more stuff for these characters to do, with small quests and small victories, along with small losses along the way. And meanwhile, in Book Fire, the main goal is prep for the eclipse, because that's the day that they're going to invade. But that takes up half the season of them getting to the place to get to for the rendezvous of the eclipse. And then the eclipse happens, and the series keeps going, because they did not win. Spoiler alert. And now, the goal, find Aang an earthbending teacher. While the rest of the seasons, the first problem was finding Aang a teacher, along with a location for him to train, that was in one case. The problem now is the second, find him a teacher. They find him a teacher, thank goodness, and now there's the problem of what are they supposed to do with Sozin Comet. Their original problem is now solved, and now Aang has started learning firebending and is slowly mastering it. Now, the end of the series climax is here. Every single season has a similar build-up. A problem that they start with, and now they solved it by halfway in the season, and now there's a new problem that they have to contend with, along with a few things scattered along in there. It's a different, slightly changed formula each time. It's a different story each season. Storytelling, by its definition, is technically formulaic, but that formula can be changed to any equation, and it'll still get you there. So don't just give us the exact same story every single time. Yes, you can have a callback episode. For example, say a character's had a big time skip in between sequels, and something that they would have had problems with in season 1 of the original, they get a callback to it. A villain that is similar or even slightly stronger than the one that they had to beat in the original. And they beat him with ease. They didn't need to do all the stuff that they did to beat the original bad guy, because they've gotten stronger. The biggest problem when making any continuation of a story is trying to do the exact same thing again, or not building on what you've already done. You've already laid the building blocks of any story that you've written if you are about to do a continuation. Use those building blocks and make something that can stand on its own, but also interlink with the original. If these things can be enjoyed just as much as someone who does not have the context of the original, and also the same just as much as someone who has already seen the original and is still enjoying it, you have succeeded in interlocking them. Well, that's where we're going to end it off today, Stonewall. I have a lot of more videos planned, And tell me if you like this video in the comments. Like, share, subscribe, do all that fancy stuff. But tell me what you want to hear more of down there in the comments. I want more suggestions of stuff. I'm trying to get more videos out, and your ideas can help me. So if you like this, tell me. If you don't like this, be nice in telling me. This is a nice, positive space where we're honest and tell people about their stuff, but we are nice and use nice stuff when talking. And if you like this video, please watch some more of my stuff. I'll put them over here somewhere. In the meantime, today, what is a story that has an amazing sequel or prequel, or an amazing midquel, and what is the story that has a terrible example of these? Just share more. I've always loved hearing about more fandoms, and also, tell me, are you excited for the next Hunger Games prequel? Because I sure am. Can't wait for 2025. Woohoo! A lot of my biggest fandoms are getting some sort of update in there, and I am just so excited. But tell me in the comments. As for me, I'm off to fight the men. Nice talking to you.